Hey everyone, it's day 24. I have completed a successful ruins rush, built a small base that I'm still working on, but already will sustain me through winter. But most important of all, I have completely tamed an ornery beefalo. Well, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, that's kind of unfair. You're playing as the best character in the game.
And maybe you're right. I don't know. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions.
However, I'm almost certain that I could replicate this with any other character, and hopefully after this video, you'll be able to do the same. Because in this video, I'm going to go over how to actually tame a beefalo. You've seen the videos on YouTube and you've probably heard others express the opinion that beefalo taming is a burden. You've been told that if you do everything perfectly, meaning you never let its hunger go below 0, and you brush it every day, it'll take you at least 15 days to fully tame your beefalo. This is correct. The fastest way you can tame a beefalo is 15 days, and it is by never letting its hunger go to 0 and brushing it with an item that you can't even obtain until day 21 unless you're extremely lucky. The availability of the brush is one thing, but the thing that I think really turns people away is the fact that the beefalo's hunger drains at 300 points per day. That's the equivalent of feeding 4 players an exclusively plant-based diet, not to mention you have to feed yourself as well. Fortunately, the beefalo can also eat twigs and grass, so you don't necessarily have to give up food that you could be eating instead. However, twigs only give 9.375 hunger, which means you have to feed the beefalo 32 twigs a day just to break even. Assuming you even have that available, picking 32 saplings per day can get really time consuming. Grass is even worse, filling only 4.68 hunger, meaning you have to feed your beef 64 pieces of grass per day to break even. It's because of this, I think a lot of people are turned off from beefalo taming, especially in the early game when you're trying to do productive things like build your first base, explore the map, and prepare for winter. You don't have time to be scouring the map for 300 points of hunger every single day. I completely agree, no one wants to waste their entire autumn just getting food for their beefalo. But guess what? You don't have to. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to worry about your beefalo's hunger at all. You see, keeping the beefalo's hunger above 0 does tame it. However, even if its hunger is at 0, it tames just as quickly while you are riding it. In order to ride a beefalo, you have to both saddle it and its obedience must be above 50%. Note, the beefalo will shake off its saddle if its obedience drops below 40%. So to preserve the saddle, you want to always keep obedience above 50. Every time you feed the beefalo anything, its obedience will increase by 10%. This includes things that don't even provide any hunger like petals, ferns, and even extremely abundant light bulbs. Therefore, you can literally tame a beefalo even if its hunger stays at 0 the entire time. You just have to increase its obedience above 50% every time you want to ride it. I did a little experiment where I tamed 2 beefalos. One I tamed while keeping it well fed with dragon pies and other food. The other, I kept its hunger at 0 the entire time and only used light bulbs in order to increase its obedience enough for me to ride it. After taming for 5 days, the beefalo that was constantly fed dragon pies and roasted potatoes is tamed at 26% or about 5% per day. On the other hand, when we tamed the beefalo without caring at all about its hunger, it tamed 23% or 4.6% per day. I believe the difference is explained by the fact that whenever I'm not riding the beefalo, the one that is at 0 hunger is always losing taming, while the one that's fed gains during this time. However, the difference is so small and amounts to around just 2 additional days of taming, since your beefalo bucks you off a lot less frequently as its taming progresses. For just 2 additional days of taming, you don't even have to worry about the 300 hunger per day burden of taming a beef. When its hunger is at 0, the beefalo's obedience decreases at about 1% every 3 seconds. This means that throughout the entire day, the beef will lose about 150% points of obedience, which is equivalent to 15 light bulbs. Light bulbs are not just extremely abundant, but you can pick up to 3 at a time. One quick pass through the light bulb fields in the muddy biome and you can easily amass over 100 light bulbs, which is technically enough to allow you to constantly ride your beefalo for almost 7 days. So instead of the extreme burden of having to somehow acquire 300 points of hunger per day, you can make one trip to the cave once every 7 days and you won't even have to worry about feeding your beef. You can also do this with other abundant resources like twigs or grass. Unlike light bulbs, twigs and grass actually fill hunger. Obedience decreases much slower when the beefalo's hunger is above 0. So you actually need about 11 twigs or 13 grass per day if you decide to use those resources instead of light bulbs. So feeding your beef for 300 points every day is more like a luxury rather than a requirement. In order to tame a beefalo in early game, you don't even have to worry about hunger. Just make sure the obedience is high enough so that it allows you to ride, and ride it as much as you can. You don't even have to run around. Even standing still on your beefalo counts as riding it. However, while you don't have to worry about hunger, when I tame my beefalo, I do consider the beefalo's hunger in 3 situations. When you first find a beefalo herd, you most likely won't be able to ride one since you need to craft a saddle, and one of the ingredients for a saddle is beefalo wool. This means that unless you lure some beefalo away from the herd and kill them, you're going to have to wait until nighttime in order to shave 2 beefalos and then get an alchemy engine in order to craft a saddle. Instead of waiting for that, what I do is feed the beefalo some twigs to get the taming process started. That way it will tame while you wait until the cover of darkness to go and shave the other beefalos. This is one of the many reasons why beefalo bells are so important. You want to craft one and immediately bind your beefalo to it so that even if you don't have a saddle, it'll still follow you around wherever you go, allowing you to feed it. Feeding your beefalo before you acquire a saddle may be a strain on your twig resources, but you'll only have to maintain this for a very short time. The second situation where I would feed it is if I'm about to do things that I can't do while riding it. While you can pick bushes, craft items, and pick things off the ground while riding a beefalo, there are many actions you can't do, like place structures, chop trees, or mine rocks. When you need to be off your beefalo in order to do an action like this, I would estimate the amount of time you'll be off and feed your beefalo accordingly. 1 twig gives your beefalo about 10 hunger, and your beefalo loses 1 hunger every 1.5 seconds. Therefore, if I'm going to be off my beefalo for a minute, I will feed it 4 twigs, since each twig will keep it fed for about 15 seconds, so the beefalo will continue to be taming while I'm not riding it. Plus, you won't have to feed it when you want to get back on, since you've not only increased its obedience by feeding it, but while the beefalo's hunger is above 0, its obedience decreases much slower. This leads me into my last situation where you want to consider your beefalo's hunger. You want to consider feeding your beefalo when you're about to enter a dangerous area. If your beefalo's obedience drops below 50%, it will not allow you to mount it. This is normally not an issue because you can just increase its obedience by feeding it a couple of times and then hopping back on. However, if you're in a dangerous area and you get bucked off, not being able to get back onto your beefalo until you've fed it a few times could be the difference between life and death. This is especially true for places like the ruins, stalagmite biomes, swamps, or if you're in the middle of a boss fight. Like mentioned before, if your beefalo's hunger is at 0, its obedience decreases 1% every 3 seconds. However, if its hunger is above 0, it decreases 1% every 9 seconds. If you top your beefalo's obedience off at 100%, but its hunger is at 0 the whole time, it will take about 2.5 minutes or 1/3 of the game day before it won't let you ride again. However, if you were to bring its hunger up to 300, you'll be able to hop off and on your beefalo for an entire game day before it doesn't allow you to do so. Feeding your beefalo in only these 3 situations will keep both it and you safe from harm, allow you to continue taming it while you do things while not riding it, while at the same time will have you only using minimal resources to do so. So we've gone over why the 300 hunger points per day is misleading and can be almost completely ignored except for certain situations. We've gone over the few situations in which you might want to consider feeding your beefalo. The last thing I want to go over is riding your beefalo before it's fully tamed. Once you've got your beefalo's obedience above 50% and saddled, you ride it by right-clicking on your beef. If you're doing this for the first time without taming it at all prior, the beefalo will only allow you to ride it for about 15 seconds. After this, it'll buck you off, you'll faceplant onto the ground, the beefalo will laugh at you as you get up, and then you have to right-click on it again to get on. While all this is happening, your beefalo will not be taming unless its hunger is above 0. To sort of mitigate this, you want to voluntarily get off your beefalo and get back on. Doing so will also reset the buck off timer, but you'll also spend much less time off your beefalo. This is a little psycho and completely unnecessary, but what I usually do on the first 2 days of taming is counting in my head how long it takes for it to buck me off, so that I can hop off right before this happens. I use the sound of the beefalo's gallop as my timer. It will gallop about 2 times per second, so I just count 1 second for every 2 gallops. With this, I can not only hop off the beefalo right before it bucks me off, but I can estimate how much time I have left in my ride. Every time I ride it, I increase my timer by about 1 second. So the first time I ride it, I assume it will buck me off in 15 seconds. The second time, I assume it will buck me off in 16. It's totally not necessary, requires a part of your brain, but I find it helpful in the first couple days. When you first start taming your beefalo, the first days will be the most frustrating. But once you get to around the 5th day, you'll be able to ride your beefalo for about a minute, which is really all the riding time that you need. With the beefalo's ridiculous 66% faster movement speed, it'll be able to take you halfway across the entire map before bucking you off. At this point, I'm not counting seconds anymore. I just ride it around and just go by feeling or let it buck me off. By the 10th day, it'll take the beefalo 2 minutes or over a quarter of the game day to buck you off. At this point, your beefalo is in my opinion almost functionally the same as a fully tamed beef, since you can basically get to and from any destination on the entire map or fight any enemy except for bosses without having to get off your beefalo a single time. Remember the experiment I did comparing taming a beefalo with light bulbs and dragon pies? By day 10, since you're getting bucked off only 4 times a day, that slight difference in taming speed between the 2 methods shrinks dramatically. By day 10 onward, it's smooth sailing. Just constantly ride it using the bare minimum that is required to mount your Beefalo, and in 10 days, you'll suddenly get a surprise as your Beefalo's entire appearance changes and you hear a sound similar to when you haunt something as a ghost. Congratulations, you have now fully tamed your Beefalo. If you started taming it early, like around day 3 to 5, it should fully tame by around day 25. Hopefully it's an ornery Beefalo. If not, Rider is pretty decent as well. Just make sure it's not pudgy, because that is not how you tame a Beefalo. And that, folks, concludes my video on how to actually tame a Beefalo. As always, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like, subscribe to get more of this kind of content, comment to let me know what you think. Take care, everybody, and have a great day.